Hey, this is a part of my Canadian short story reading project. A fellow named Kevin Hardcastle selected 73 Canadian short stories to read midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, so I'm working my way through them. This time it is Common Whipping by Nabin Rthnm. And this is a story about a young film composer in 1970s in Rome who has sort of turned to prostitution to sort of support himself as a additional thing. It's I'm going to talk about the whole story, so because it is a short story. Have a look online somewhere and see if you can find it and you can read it too. There's not a ton to actually, I think, spoil in the story, so let's go through there. This is the young composer is Renga, and it opens with him talking with an older gentleman, a John, and basically it's like, well, why are you in Rome, like, for film composition? It's like apparently his Italian is passable, but it's not that great. Apparently he tries to him speaking Italian. He can see the older the gentleman Massimo. It's kind of face kind of gives that contortion when foreigners butcher their language. And they ask like, oh, well, why aren't you going to like India and trying to work there? And it's like, well, there's no Enrico Morricone there, and also he's just like, it's they're all into voices. They're all into voices stuff there. I don't want voices. I don't like how they use voices. And he has a line actually for him. He has a line on a film, a first time film director who is looking for someone who wants to do a score and kind of do it kind of classical. He says Bach, but he figures that probably he only knows Bach. And he says, "Oh, okay, yeah, I might give that a try." A couple of months earlier, he switches to a thing with his roommate Enzo, who is of Turkish Swedish descent, who's also a prostitute, has a very specific kind of clientele. He is incredibly thin. His skin is lucent. They talk about him having, basically his body is covered with peach fuzz, and as this is a story that's set in the 70s, it's like we didn't have like a name for his disorder, but it seems like with the kind of the idea of the peach fuzz, that's you've starved yourself so much that your body's actually growing hair to try and keep you warm. It's like severe anorexia. But Enzo has a very particular kind of clientele, and he 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 he's what's it? It's like the role Enzo had come up with, literal whipping boy to the fallen elite and its acolytes, justified the emaciated body he created long before he took on his name and career. He basically, as many of his clients came straight from the old guard, Mussolini's closest friends, former futurists and politicians who'd eventually washed up in the business and film worlds of Rome, either making regulations or doing their best to break them up. He he is the literal whipping boy of these fascists, these just fallen fascists, who are still plying their trade, and kind of indulges their fantasy. And indeed, they go to this guy's place where he gives them a fake name, and while Renga sits downstairs with the Irish wolfhounds, this guy whips him so horribly that he is left bleeding. They have to take him to a veterinarian to get him patched up. And it turns out 2 months later that when he's brought to the film director, he finds out, oh, that film director is indeed this sadist, fascist, asshole. I mean, I guess it's consenting adults, but almost kind of killed this Enzo. Enzo actually had like he'd said to Enzo before he met the meeting, is like, I think it's going to be this guy. It's like, well, oh, good. Well, then you know what buttons to push to kind of make sure he takes your stuff, because you're really desperate to get a good gig. And then it's funny because he says, Ringa says to himself when he's talking to the initial John. It's like, well, I learned like, selling my body and my mouth uh, is got a lot of similarities of being a prostitute and working in the film industry, and there is a bit of that kind of like, well, he did what he prostituted himself to do it. Um, there's also just an interesting thing of when Renga talks about his music. He says, "I hate voices, what they do in popular music. That's why I couldn't stand to go to India. You write for the movies there. You're a slave to the playback singer, the stupid melody they want. Morricone, he makes voices behave, forces them to be music. There's a line, a structure, something that's written on piano, a theme the flute will pick up when the voice can't reach. Either that or he just makes them yelp in the recording booth and at the right pitch, at the right time. That I like. That's how voices should be used." And there's kind of a thing there of making them yelp in the recording booth. It's like you get that the whipping. It's like, and it's Morricone. I think of like, the spaghetti westerns, and there's like kind of the hi hi and noises in a Morricone thing. There's that kind of like, there is that kind of a structure, and you're kind of going like, oh God, that is it's sort of a sadistic kind of, we're going to force the voice to be in our structure. It's like there's a fascistic thing there, and we have Enzo, who is starving his body to form the role that he wants to play, which is a victim for one of these fascists. Now, the story itself, so it's got that interesting interplay meld. So I found the story like kind of really interesting that way, and indeed also just having like, these are all men engaged in, it's a gay underworld, but in the fascist kind of ultra conservative, rigid kind of machismo kind of setting, but these fascists are, it's interesting that they're gay fascists, that had, and that what their sexuality was like, a victim and master kind of stuff. Not that there aren't victims and that kind of relationships in heterosexual relationships either, but just it's interesting that they're melded together there. As the story ends, he comes back from the kind of the opening of this thing, and he finds that Enzo is gone and all his belongings are gone except for his wallet, which held a picture of him as a boy pre his transformation, meaning which makes Renga think like, well, he went somewhere with a purpose, but it's not really clear, like, is that purpose complete disappearing, like the anorexia? It's like he's completely disappeared into whatever role, or is he kind of getting away from this life, and it's a sign of escaping this kind of this horrible death dealing structure role or something like there. It's not really clear. It's not really clear whether Renga has basically prostituted his art as well as his body in this story, like, or has he got his break and he's going to indulge his own that kind of that structure. I'm going to make the voices yelp structure. So yeah, so an interesting story this time about. I enjoyed it, even though I'm slightly. I found the ending was just sort of one of those. It's an open-ended story where I don't know if there's quite as much there as I want to kind of keep me going back and thinking about it. Though even just discussing it now and just those kind of like those interplays of making the voice yelp in the recording booth, and the screams of Enzo as he gets Enzo, because that's not his actual name, as he gets whipped by this sadistic former fascist director. is these mirroring each other, and the subjugation of some sort of an art, the human for some sort of an art, and whether that is actually a healthy life-giving art, or if that's a structure that is there to just grind down and extinguish human beings. All right, more videos later.